The objective of this short video is a modest one. What I want to do is offer some definitions for the various types of ways that electric utility service can be organized. In other words, what are the different business models that are used for providing this service? It's an important time to consider that right now because we're going to be looking in the next couple of classes at what local governments can do and what states can do in terms of providing service. And when you do that, you look at options that wouldn't be available if you were only dealing exclusively with investor-owned utilities. So let's dig in. You know, when people first started using electricity in the 1800s, it wasn't provided as a service by a separate entity. It was something that people did on their own, or businesses did on their own. If they needed electric power for one reason or another, they might have a dynamo in the basement of their office building or in the basement of a factory. But then in 1882, Thomas Edison tried something else. He created what was referred to as the Pearl Street Station in New York. It's one of the first examples of electricity being provided as a service. At the station, he had an electric generator. He ran wires from that and some poles and went to various businesses in downtown Manhattan that were close by. And this service then became duplicated and replicated in various other parts of New York and in other parts of the country as well. And in the early days, the model really was one of having very small neighborhood scale companies. Well, over time, those companies started to merge and it became cost beneficial to have the service provided by a larger company. And then the question had to be, how are we going to organize these? What's the business model going to be? Will it be a private company? Will it be something owned by government itself? Or will it be owned by the customers? Those were the kind of things that were debated. And initially, the people settled initially on relying more than anything else on what we refer to as investor-owned utilities. What is a investor-owned utility? Well, first, it's either privately held. You can have somebody like Warren Buffett who decides he wants to own the company all by himself, or it has shares that are publicly traded on a stock exchange like the New York or NASDAQ stock exchanges. It's a profit-making company, and in exchange for the right to have an exclusive service territory and serve all the people in that area, this investor-owned company had to subject itself to economic regulation. That's where the Public Utilities Commissions, or sometimes referred to as public service commissions or corporation boards or whatever you want to call it, every state created an economic regulatory agency. And so did the federal government, ultimately calling it the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The theory was this is a profit-making entity that's going to have to bear the risk of any investments that are made. If money is put in a power plant and that power plant turns out not to be productive, then maybe the investors will be stuck with that cost all of their own. And in exchange for that, the company had an obligation to serve anybody who wanted electric service within its service territory. And it also was obligated to make sure that the service was dependable, it had to be reliable, and that the cost of the service was what people refer to as just and reasonable. And you see those words repeated in the laws all over the country and on the federal level. Now, why is it necessary to have that assurance? Because, in effect, this company is a monopoly, and if left to its own devices, economists tell us monopolies will provide too little service at too high a price. So we have economic regulation in place to ensure that the service is provided at a just and reasonable price and that everybody who wants service can get service. Another model is referred to as a municipal utility. And now this is an entity that in fact is owned by the government. And instead of having economic regulation, it has a board that's elected. It's either a separately elected board that just serves as the overseers for the municipal utility, or it may be the city council in the city where the community provides service, or it might be the county board of supervisors. One way or another, it's an elected body. And the theory is, because it's an elected body, there's no need for economic regulation. These elected officials will be accountable at the ballot box if service is not reliable and if prices aren't just and reasonable. But since you don't have private investors, that means that you have the risk of bad investments being borne instead by the people who live in that jurisdiction, the taxpayers. What about this obligation to serve and this notion of having a reliable service and just and reasonable rates? Again, this is a matter of accountability to the electorate, and so it's not treated as an express obligation, but in fact, if service wasn't reliable, if it wasn't provided everywhere it was needed, if the price wasn't reasonable, then in theory, people would change things at the ballot box. A third variation, which is actually very similar to a municipal utility, is referred to as a cooperative. Now, where a municipal utility is owned by the government itself and then is accountable to people through elections, a cooperative is actually owned by the customers. And again, there's a board that's usually elected by the customers to run the agency. And again, they serve as at the electoral pleasure. If they're not doing a good job, then they may get thrown out of office. It's not a not-for-profit organization. And in this instance, if there are bad investments, the cost of those investments is going to be borne by the customers themselves. There's nowhere else to go. Same kind of issues as we had with munis about obligation to serve. Any member of the co-op has a right to demand service. And of course, if service is not reliable and prices aren't appropriate, then maybe there'll be a change of the board and the organization itself will change. So these are three fundamental types of utilities that we see in various places in the country. Now, who's being served by which kind of utilities? This graphic is intended to give you a sense of the number of electricity providers themselves. And as you can see, the vast majority of them are what's referred to as publicly owned or municipal utilities. Investor-owned utilities are really only the small blue section over here on the left side near the bottom. So this makes it look like fundamentally services being provided by munis in the United States. But if you were to look at the number of customers and what type of company is serving them, then everything flips around. And here you can see the overwhelming majority, 68%, 68.6% of the customers are actually served by investor-owned utilities, and the municipal utilities actually have a much smaller customer base. So logically, what this means is you've got a lot of munis, some of which are very small, and then you have a smaller number of investor-owned utilities, some of which are very large, and so it's fundamentally through this system of supporting the creation of investor-owned utilities that most of the service is being provided in the United States. Now we're also going to be talking about a different model, which is referred to as community choice aggregation. Now, where does that fit in with these other models we talked about? Here on the left, you see what people generally refer to as a traditional investor-owned utility. This is a company that may be what is referred to as vertically integrated. It may have its own power plants, its own transmission lines, and its own distribution system, and its own customer service fleet in terms of people who come out and help you if you've got an outage. On the right, you can see municipal utility, which has the same options. Sometimes the smaller municipal utilities may not have enough of a customer base to rationalize building their own transmission lines, so they may use some other utilities transmission service and pay for it. But a muni can be vertically integrated just like any other utility can be. A community choice aggregation, on the other hand, is a different animal. The only thing that a community choice aggregation does is buys power and arranges to have that power delivered across the utility transmission and the utility distribution system to their customers. So in other words, they're a power purchaser. They have a retail relationship with the customers that they serve. Those customers are usually defined by some sort of city or county boundary, or maybe a group of cities and counties together that create that boundary. But the service that they provide, the power that they provide, is going to have to rely on the traditional utility to deliver it. So it can be, I think, characterized as a hybrid service. And we'll talk in detail in class, and you'll see in the readings some of the pluses and minuses from using these various models. But to provide some context, here's what's going on in California in terms of community choice aggregation. You can see that by the end of 2021, it's anticipated that the great majority of the customers who receive utility service in California will be having that power purchased on their behalf by a community choice aggregation. Almost all of the very large municipal areas within the state are going with community choice aggregation. One of the few exceptions is Sacramento, which has its own municipal utility, and the city of Los Angeles itself, not Los Angeles County, but the city boundaries are served by Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which again is a municipal utility. But California is not alone in terms of having the ability to have community choice aggregation. You can see on this map all of the states that are in green have active programs for providing service through community choice aggregations. And the states that are in other colors here are in one stage or another of considering adopting community choice aggregation. So again, what are the benefits of this, and what are the implications for one model versus another model if what you're pursuing is the development of renewable energy? These are questions that we'll be addressing in class, and hopefully you'll get some insight about these issues also by the readings we have for the next session.